The sound of a hand striking flesh echoed louder than the church bells of Coyote Springs. The entire congregation gasped, then fell into a terrified silence. At the altar, the wealthiest, cruelest man in the territory, Silas Thorne, stood over his trembling bride, his hand raised for a second blow. He thought he owned the town. He thought he owned the law. But as the church doors burst open, blinding sunlight flooded the nave, revealing a shadow that made even the bravest men freeze. Thorne had money, but the giant standing in the doorway had a tomahawk, a debt to pay, and a promise to keep. This is the story of the wedding that turned into a war. The Arizona heat in 1874 didn't just make you sweat, it cooked you from the inside out. But inside the Holy Redeemer Church, the air was cold, stagnant, and smelled of stale incense and fear. Kelly O'Malley adjusted the lace collar of her wedding dress. It was a beautiful gown, imported all the way from St. Louis, made of silk and intricate lace that cost more than most families in Coyote Springs earned in a decade. But to Kelly, it felt heavy, like a canvas shroud wrapped around a corpse. In a way, that's exactly what she was. Her life, the vibrant, hopeful life of a 20-year-old girl who loved painting landscapes and riding horses bareback, was ending today. She stood in the small vestibule, staring at the dust motes dancing in the sliver of light coming through the cracked door. Beside her stood her father, Seamus O'Malley. Once a proud man, a man with a booming laugh who ran the most successful freight line in the territory, Seamus was now a shadow. His skin was gray, his eyes rimmed with red, and his hands shook, not from age, but from the withdrawal of whiskey and the terror of what he had done. "It's time, Kelly," Seamus whispered, his voice cracking. He refused to meet her eyes. He couldn't. "Do I have to do this, Pa?" Kelly asked, though she already knew the answer. She wasn't asking for permission to leave. She was asking for him to acknowledge the sacrifice. Seamus wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip. "Silas, Mr. Thorne holds the notes, Kelly. All of them. The ranch, the freight wagons, the house. If you don't walk down that aisle, we're on the street by sundown. And with my heart, I won't last a week in the gutters." "So I'm the payment," Kelly said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He loves you," Seamus lied. They both knew it was a lie. "He'll provide for you." Silas Thorne didn't love anything except power and control. He was 50 years old, with eyes like flint and a reputation that kept the town cemetery busy. He had buried 2 wives already, one from fever and one from a fall. Now, he wanted Kelly, not because of affection, but because she was the only thing in town he didn't own yet. She was beautiful, with fiery hair and a spirit that irritated him. He wanted to break that spirit like a wild mustang. The organ groaned to life, played by Mrs. Gable, whose arthritis made the wedding march sound more like a funeral dirge. "Let's go," Seamus said, gripping her arm a little too tight. The doors swung open. The church was packed. Every soul in Coyote Springs was there, from the mayor, Tobias Finch, to the saloon girls from the Rusty Spur, who stood in the back, dabbing their eyes. But it wasn't a celebration. It was a witnessing. They were watching a sacrifice. As Kelly walked down the aisle, she felt the eyes of the town on her. She saw Sheriff One-Eye Miller leaning against a pillar, his hand resting near his gun. He was on Thorne's payroll, just like everyone else. She saw the pity in the eyes of the baker, Mrs. Higgins. But pity didn't stop weddings. At the end of the aisle stood Silas Thorne, He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that cost a fortune. His hair was slicked back with oil, and his mustache was perfectly groomed. But it was his smile that froze Kelly's blood. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smirk of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. He didn't reach out his hand to help her up the steps. He simply waited, tapping his expensive leather boot on the wood floor, checking his pocket watch as if she were a train running late. When Kelly reached the altar, Seamus stepped back quickly, retreating into the pews as if fleeing a burning building. Kelly was left alone next to the man who owned her future. Father Jeremiah, a thin, nervous priest who owed Thorne for the new church roof, cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," he squeaked, rushing the words, "we are gathered here to join this man and this woman." Kelly looked at Silas's hands. They were large, thick-fingered hands. She noticed a ring on his pinky finger, a heavy gold signet ring. She wondered how hard that ring would feel against her cheek. "Do you, Silas Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Father Jeremiah asked. "I do," Silas said. His voice was a deep rumble, resonating through the wooden church. He looked at the congregation, daring anyone to object. No one breathed. "And do you, Kelly O'Malley?" The priest turned to her, sweat dripping down his temple. "Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to obey and serve as long as you both shall live?" The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5. Kelly's throat closed up. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. She looked at the crucifix hanging behind the altar, begging for a miracle. She looked at her father in the front row, his head in his hands. "Kelly," Silas whispered. It wasn't a term of endearment. It was a command. She looked up at him. For the first time that day, the fire in her sparked. She saw the smugness in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he could buy a human being. Kelly stammered. "I don't know if I can." The gasp from the congregation sucked the air out of the room. Silas's face went from smug to purple in a heartbeat. His veneer of gentlemanly behavior shattered instantly. He grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "You will," he hissed, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "or your father dies in prison." "You're hurting me," Kelly said, trying to pull away. "I own you," Silas snarled. "I bought the debt, I bought the land, and I bought you." "I am not cattle, Silas," she shouted, her voice ringing out. That was the breaking point. Silas Thorne, humiliated in front of the town he ruled, reacted the only way he knew how. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He swung his right hand. Crack. The back of his hand connected with Kelly's cheekbone. The force of the blow knocked her off her feet. She sprawled onto the altar steps, her white dress billowing around her, the taste of copper filling her mouth. The church went deathly silent. Sheriff Miller straightened up, but didn't move to stop it. Seamus half rose from his seat, then sank back down, sobbing. Silas loomed over her, his face twisted in rage. He raised his hand again, his fist clenched this time. "Get up," he roared. "Get up and say the words, or I'll finish this right here." Kelly looked up, tears blurring her vision, bracing for the second blow. She closed her eyes. Boom! The heavy double doors at the back of the church didn't just open. They were kicked inward with such force that one of the hinges snapped, sending wood splinters flying. The sudden intrusion of blinding midday sun turned the newcomer into a silhouette, a towering dark shape framed by the harsh Arizona light. Dust swirled around him like a storm cloud. Silas Thorne froze, his fists still raised. The congregation turned, necks craning. As the figure stepped into the church, the light adjusted, and the gasps turned into terrified murmurs. He was a giant of a man, standing nearly 6'6". He wore the dust-covered buckskins of a traveler who had ridden hard and long. His hair was long and black, tied back with a leather cord, and streaks of war paint, old and faded but visible, marked his high cheekbones. He was Apache, but he wasn't just any warrior. This was Chayton. The name was whispered from pew to pew. "Is that the scout?" "It's the wolf. I thought he was dead." Chayton had been a legend in the territory, an Apache who had served as a scout for the U.S. cavalry, hunting down renegades before turning his back on the army after the Camp Grant massacre. He was a man who walked between worlds, belonging to neither, feared by both. He walked down the center aisle. His steps were silent, his moccasins making no sound on the floorboards, yet his presence was heavier than the boots of the 20 men in the room. He carried a Winchester repeater in one hand, the barrel pointed at the floor, and a tomahawk tucked into his belt. Sheriff Miller, sweating profusely, stepped out from the pillar. "Now, look here, Indian. This is a private ceremony. You got no business." Chayton didn't even look at the sheriff. He simply kept walking. As he passed Miller, he moved with a speed that defied his size. The barrel of his rifle snapped up, catching the sheriff under the chin, lifting him onto his toes, and slamming him back against the pillar. "Sit," Chayton rumbled. His voice was like grinding stones. The sheriff sat. Chayton continued until he reached the altar. He stopped 10 feet from where Silas Thorne stood over the fallen bride. Silas lowered his hand, trying to regain his composure. He straightened his jacket, sneering at the intruder. "You're trespassing, savage. I suggest you turn around before my men fill you with lead." Chayton looked at Silas. Then his dark eyes shifted to Kelly. He looked at the red mark blooming on her pale cheek, then at the blood on her lip. His expression didn't change. It remained a mask of stone, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Help her up," Chayton said. Silas laughed, a nervous barking sound. "Who do you think you are talking to? I am Silas Thorne. I run this territory." "Help her up." Silas put his hand on the pearl handle of his revolver. "Boy, you are 1 second away from meeting your ancestors." In a blur of motion, Chayton raised his rifle. But he didn't shoot. He threw it. The heavy rifle spun through the air and struck Silas square in the chest, knocking the wind out of him and sending him stumbling back against the altar railing. Before Silas could recover, Chayton was on him. He grabbed Silas by the throat with one hand, lifting the wealthy rancher off the ground as easily as a man lifts a child. Silas clawed at the massive hand crushing his windpipe, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. Chayton leaned in close. "You strike the woman again," Chayton whispered, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent church, "and I will cut your heart out and feed it to the coyotes while you watch." He dropped Silas. The groom collapsed in a heap, gasping for air, clutching his throat. Chayton turned to Kelly. The terrifying rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by a strange, solemn softness. He extended a large, calloused hand. Kelly stared at him. She remembered him now, not as a warrior, but from years ago, when she was a child. He had worked at the livery stable for a winter. She had given him an apple once when the town boys were throwing rocks at him. He had carved her a small wooden horse in return. "Chayton?" she whispered. "Stand up, little bird," he said, using the name he had given her back then. Kelly took his hand. He pulled her to her feet with gentle strength. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" "A debt is never forgotten," Chayton said cryptically. He looked at her father, Seamus, who was staring with his mouth open. "Your father did not send for me, but the wind carries whispers." "You can't take her." Silas wheezed from the floor, struggling to his knees. "She's mine. We have a contract." Chayton turned back to the room. He looked at the stunned guests. "The contract is broken. By blood." He looked at Kelly. "Do you wish to stay?" Kelly looked at the church, at the faces of the people who had watched her walk to her doom without lifting a finger. She looked at her father, who was too weak to save her. And she looked at Silas, whose eyes promised murder the moment the Apache left. "No," Kelly said, her voice gaining strength. "Take me away." "Then we ride," Chayton said. "You won't make it to the town line," Silas screamed, his face red with fury. He scrambled for his gun, which had fallen during the scuffle. "Sheriff! Deputies! Kill him! Kill them both!" Sheriff Miller was already blowing his whistle. The sound pierced the air. Outside, men were shouting. The deputies stationed around the church were racking their shotguns. Chayton grabbed Kelly's arm. "Run!" He kicked the side door of the church open, dragging Kelly into the blinding sunlight. As they burst outside, a bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Kelly's head. "My horse!" Chayton shouted, pointing to a massive Appaloosa tied to the hitching post. "Get on!" Kelly gathered her heavy dress, the silk tearing on the rough wood of the fence, and scrambled onto the horse. Chayton vaulted up behind her, grabbing the reins. "Hold tight!" Gunfire erupted from the front of the church. Bullets whizzed past them like angry hornets. Chayton kicked the horse, and the beast reared, crying out before thundering down the dusty main street of Coyote Springs. Silas Thorne burst out of the church doors, his revolver in hand. He fired wildly after them, but they were already moving too fast, a blur of white silk and buckskin disappearing into the dust. "Get the horses!" Silas screamed, his voice tearing at his throat. "Get the posse! I want them dead! I want his scalp, and I want her back!" As the town scrambled into chaos, Chayton steered the horse not toward the easy roads, but toward the jagged, unforgiving red rocks of the badlands. Kelly buried her face in the leather of Chayton's vest, the smell of sage and gunpowder filling her nose. She had escaped the devil she knew, but now she was riding into the wilderness with a man the whole territory considered a monster. And the sun was just beginning to set on the longest day of her life. The horse, a powerful Appaloosa stallion Chayton called Coda, was frothing at the mouth. They had been riding hard for 3 hours, pushing deep into the broken, jagged terrain known to the locals as the Devil's Garden. Here, the Arizona landscape shifted from flat scrubland to a nightmare of red sandstone spires, slot canyons, and cactus forests that could tear a rider to shreds. It was a place where white men died of thirst and horses broke their legs. But for Chayton, it was a chessboard, and he knew every square. Kelly held on to Chayton's waist, her arms aching. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, replaced by a dull, throbbing terror and the physical misery of the ride. Her wedding dress, once a pristine symbol of her captivity, was now a ruin. The hem was torn away, stained with red dust and horse sweat. The corset dug into her ribs, making it hard to breathe in the thin, hot air. "We stop here," Chayton grunted, pulling on the reins. They slid to a halt in the shadow of a massive overhang, hidden from the ridge above. Chayton swung his leg over the saddle and landed silently. He reached up and pulled Kelly down. Her legs wobbled as she hit the ground, and she nearly collapsed. "Drink," Chayton said, handing her a leather canteen. Kelly drank greedily. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. "Are they still coming?" she gasped, wiping her mouth with a dirty lace glove. Chayton moved to the edge of the overhang, scanning the horizon with eyes that seemed to magnify the distance. Thorn is a man of pride. He will not stop until his horse dies, or he does. But he does not know this land. He tracks like a buffalo, loud and clumsy. "He has Sheriff Miller," Kelly said, shivering despite the heat, "and the deputies. City men." Chayton dismissed them. "They fear the silence out here. But Thorn, he has money. Money buys better hunters." Kelly looked at the giant warrior. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His chest was broad, scarred from old battles, knife marks, bullet grazes, the history of a violent life written on his skin. Yet, he was looking at her with a strange lack of malice. "You have to tell me," Kelly said, her voice finding its edge. "You said you owed a debt. Was it the apple? Because I gave you a piece of fruit 10 years ago, you ruined your life to save mine?" Chayton began checking the horse's hooves, lifting the heavy leg with one hand. "An apple is a kindness, but it does not buy a life." He looked at her over the saddle. "It was not you I owed. It was Sarah." Kelly froze. The name hung in the hot air. "My mother?" 10 years ago, Chayton said, his voice lowering. "General Crook's soldiers were hunting my band. I was separated, shot in the leg. I crawled into the barn behind your father's freight station. I was ready to die. I had my knife in my hand, waiting for the blue coats to find me." Kelly listened, entranced. Her mother had died of influenza 6 years ago. She was a soft, church-going woman. The idea of her harboring a fugitive warrior seemed impossible. "She found me," Chayton continued. "She did not scream. She did not call your father. She saw the blood. She brought me water. She brought me bandages. She hid me under the floorboards of the grain storage for 3 days while the soldiers searched the property." He stood up, towering over Kelly. "She told me that all life is sacred, even the life of a savage. When I left, I swore to her that her blood would be my blood. I watched you grow up from the shadows, Kelly. I watched Seamus drink his fortune away. I watched Thorn circle like a buzzard. When I heard the wedding bells today, I knew Sarah would not want her daughter sold like a mule." Kelly felt tears prick her eyes. She had always thought her mother was weak, a victim of the harsh frontier. She realized now her mother had a spine of steel. "So, you're my guardian angel?" Kelly asked, a bitter laugh escaping her. "A guardian angel with a tomahawk?" "I am no angel," Chayton said, his face hardening as he looked at the sky. "And where we are going, angels do not tread." He moved to his saddlebags and pulled out a large, terrifyingly sharp Bowie knife. He walked toward her. Kelly stepped back, her heart hammering. "What are you doing?" "The dress," Chayton said, pointing the knife. "It is white. It shines in the sun like a mirror. They will see you from 5 miles away. And it restricts your movement. Cut it." Kelly looked down at the silk. It was worth $2,000. It was the only expensive thing she had ever worn, and it was a target on her back. She took the knife. It was heavy. With a shaking hand, She grabbed the heavy layers of petticoats and silk. She slashed. The fabric ripped with a satisfying sound. She cut away the train, the heavy lace sleeves, and the restrictive hoops, leaving her in a makeshift, knee-length tunic over her bloomers. She looked ridiculous, but she could move. She felt lighter. "Good," Chayton said, taking the knife back. "Now we ride. We must reach the Ghost Canyon before sundown. If we are caught on the open plain at night, we are dead." "What's in Ghost Canyon?" Kelly asked, as he helped her back onto the horse. "Water," Chayton said, "and the only path through the mountains that a wagon cannot follow." As they rode out from the shelter, a distant sound echoed off the canyon walls. Pop, pop, gunfire. Chayton didn't look back. He kicked Coda into a gallop. The bullets were hitting the rocks 500 yards behind them, kicking up puffs of red dust. They were closer than he thought. Back at the church, the chaos had settled into a grim, organized fury. Silas Thorne stood on the steps, his expensive suit covered in dust. He was watching the posse form. Sheriff Miller was there, nursing a bruised jaw, along with 6 deputies. But Silas wasn't looking at them. He was looking at a man who had just ridden into town on a mule. The man was small, wiry, and wore a long duster coat that had seen better days. He smoked a thin cigarillo and wore round, dark spectacles that hid his eyes. He didn't look like much, but the deputies gave him a wide berth. His name was Jedediah Cross. Cross was a legend in the worst way. A former Confederate sniper who had turned to bounty hunting, he was known for never bringing a target back alive unless he was paid double. He didn't track footprints. He tracked psychology. "You're the man?" Silas asked, walking down the steps. Cross spat on the ground, near Silas's boot. "I'm the man who kills the Apache. The girl, that costs extra." "I want the girl back alive," Silas said, his voice tight. "She has value." "She's with Chayton," Cross said, his voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering on stone. "If she's with him, she's already changed. You want her back? You better be prepared for her to hate you." "I don't care if she hates me," Silas snarled. "I own the deed to the O'Malley Ranch. But the mineral rights, the gold vein found in the survey last month, that belongs to the O'Malley bloodline. I need her signature to start mining. Once she signs, I don't care if she lives or dies." Cross tilted his head. "So it ain't love. It's gold. I work better with greed. It's predictable. Can you find them?" "He's taken her to the badlands," Cross said, pointing a gloved finger toward the red horizon. "He'll go for the high ground. Ghost Canyon. He thinks the terrain will stop us." "Will it?" "It'll stop you," Cross said, looking at the fat, sweating sheriff. "It'll stop your deputies, but it won't stop me." Cross reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rifle. It wasn't a standard Winchester. It was a Sharps buffalo rifle, modified with a telescopic sight, a weapon designed to kill from a mile away. "I'll need fresh horses," Cross said, "and I ride alone. Your men make too much noise." "Bring her back," Silas commanded, "and bring me the Apache's head." "I'll bring you his scalp," Cross corrected. "It's lighter to carry." High in the Superstition Mountains, night had fallen. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in an hour. The heat of the day was replaced by a bone-chilling cold. Chayton had found a small cave halfway up a sheer cliff face. It was accessible only by a narrow goat path. They had left the horse in a box canyon below, hidden in a thicket of mesquite. Inside the cave, Chayton risked a small fire. He used dried sage and buffalo dung, which burned with very little smoke. The flickering light cast long dancing shadows on the walls. Kelly sat near the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. She was exhausted, bruised, and hungry. Chayton was roasting a rabbit he had snared earlier. "Here," he said, handing her a leg. Kelly ate it. It was tough and gamey, but she didn't complain. She watched Chayton. He was cleaning his Winchester, his movements rhythmic and precise. "Where do we go?" Kelly asked softly. "We can't live in a cave forever." "Mexico," Chayton said. "The Sierra Madre. I have kin there. Thorne's law does not reach across the border." "Mexico is hundreds of miles away," Kelly whispered. "Yes." "We won't make it." Chayton stopped cleaning the gun. He looked at her. The firelight softened his harsh features. "We will make it. But you must decide something, Kelly O'Malley." "Decide what? To be the victim or the survivor?" Kelly frowned. "I didn't choose this." "None of us choose the storm," Chayton said. "We only choose how we stand in it. Thorne has sent a hunter. I saw the flash of a looking glass on the ridge before sunset. A Sharp's rifle, long range." "A sniper?" Kelly's blood ran cold. "A professional. He is not tracking our footprints. He is predicting our path. He knows I will go for water. He knows I will go for the high passes. So what do? "We stop running," Chayton said darkly. "We start hunting." "I can't shoot a gun," Kelly protested. "I paint landscapes. I play the piano." Chayton reached behind him and pulled out a heavy Colt Navy revolver. He placed it in her lap. The metal was cold and heavy. "The piano is gone," Chayton said. "The landscapes are here, and they are cruel. You do not need to be a soldier. You just need to be dangerous. If I fall, this is your only friend." Kelly looked at the gun. It was ugly. It smelled of oil and death. She thought of Silas Thorne's hand striking her face. She thought of her father cowering in the pew. She thought of the life she was supposed to have. Slowly, her hand closed around the grip. Her finger rested near the trigger. It felt heavy, but it also felt empowering. "Show me," she said. Chayton nodded, a rare flicker of approval in his eyes. "First, you check the cylinder." As he began to teach her, the wind howled outside the cave, carrying the sound of a coyote. But down in the valley, another sound drifted up, faint, rhythmic, and terrifying. It was the sound of a harmonica playing a slow, mournful tune. "Oh, Susanna," played at a funeral pace. Chayton extinguished the fire instantly, plunging them into darkness. "He is here," Chayton whispered, cross. The hunter had found them faster than even Chayton had feared. They were pinned down on the cliff, with a sniper below, and nowhere to run. The harmonica stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than the music. Inside the shallow cave, Chayton pressed his back against the cold stone wall. He motioned for Kelly to stay low. "He stops playing to listen," Chayton whispered. "He wants us to move, to make a sound." Crack. A bullet smashed into the rock face just inches outside the cave entrance. Stone shards sprayed inward, cutting Kelly's cheek. The sound of the shot arrived a split second later. Heavy, booming, the signature of a Sharp's buffalo rifle. "He has the angle," Chayton noted calmly, wiping a speck of blood from his own forehead. "He is not shooting at us. He is shooting at the rock to make it fragment. He is turning the cave into a shotgun." "We're trapped," Kelly said, her voice rising in panic. She gripped the heavy Colt revolver Chayton had given her. It felt alien and clumsy in her artist's hands. "No," Chayton said. "We are only trapped if we stay." He crawled toward her, his large frame moving with surprising silence. Cross is below us, to the east. He is watching the path. But he expects me to fight like a white man, to return fire from cover. How do you fight? Like a ghost. Chayton took off his heavy buckskin vest and bundled it around a large rock. I will draw his fire. You must go down the chimney. Kelly looked at the back of the cave. There was a narrow fissure, a vertical crack in the rock that dropped down into darkness. It was barely wide enough for a person. That leads to the canyon floor, Chayton said. It drops out right behind the mesquite thicket where Coda is tied. You must climb down, get the horse, ride south, fast. And leave you? Kelly shook her head violently. No, he'll kill you. He will try, Chayton said, a grim smile touching his lips. But while he is looking at me, he will not see you. If you do not go, we both die here. Go. He didn't wait for an answer. Chayton grabbed the bundle, his decoy, and hurled it toward the cave entrance. As soon as the shape moved across the moonlight, the night erupted. Boom! The sniper fired. Kelly scrambled backward into the fissure. She lowered herself into the dark crack. The stone was rough and cold, scraping her skin raw as she shimmied down. Above her, she heard gunfire, the rapid crack, crack, crack of Chayton's Winchester answering the booming roar of the Sharps. The descent was a nightmare. Kelly slipped, her boots scrabbling for purchase, her fingers bleeding as she gripped sharp protrusions of rock. Spiders scuttled over her hands. Dust choked her. But the fear of the man in the duster coat below drove her downward. She dropped the last 5 feet, landing hard in the soft sand of the canyon floor. She was hidden in the shadows of the cliff. She could hear the horse, Coda, stomping nervously in the brush nearby. She ran to him, untying the reins with trembling fingers. Boom! A shot rang out, followed by a grunt of pain from the cave above. Chayton! Kelly gasped. She mounted the horse, but she didn't ride south. She couldn't. The debt Chayton spoke of, saving her because her mother saved him, went both ways now. She kicked the horse, guiding him not away from the danger, but toward the sniper's position. Jedediah Cross was lying prone on a flat rock about 200 yards away, his eye pressed to the long brass scope of his rifle. He was reloading, a calm, mechanical motion. He was smiling. He knew he had hit the big Indian. Kelly rode Coda out of the brush, screaming to startle the sniper. Hey, over here! Cross spun around, surprised. He hadn't expected the girl to be on the ground. He raised his rifle, but a buffalo gun is heavy and slow to aim at a moving target at close range. Kelly raised the heavy Colt with 2 hands. She didn't aim. She just pointed and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet went wide, hitting a cactus. Bang! Dirt kicked up near Cross's boots. It wasn't accurate, but it was enough. Cross flinched, rolling off his rock to seek cover. Kelly, ride! Chayton's voice roared from the cliff above. A moment later, Chayton jumped. It was a suicidal leap, 20 feet down from the cave ledge to a slope of loose shale. He landed in a roll, sliding down the mountain in a cloud of dust, ignoring the impact. He hit the canyon floor running. He sprinted toward Kelly and the horse. His left shoulder was dark with blood. Move over, he shouted. Kelly scooted back on the saddle. Chayton vaulted onto the horse in front of her, grabbing the reins. Hold on! He spun Coda around. A bullet whizzed past Kelly's ear, snapping a lock of her hair. Cross was back in position, firing rapidly with a revolver now. Chayton kicked the stallion's flanks, and the horse surged forward, thundering down the dry wash. They rounded a bend, just as another bullet chipped the sandstone wall next to them. They rode in silence for a mile, the wind tearing at their faces. When they were finally out of range, Chayton slowed the horse to a trot. He slumped slightly forward. "You are hurt," Kelly said, pressing her hand against his back. It came away warm and wet. "It went through." Chayton grunted through gritted teeth. "The bone is whole. That is what matters." He turned his head slightly, looking at her over his good shoulder. "I told you to ride south." "I'm bad at following orders," Kelly said, her voice shaking from the adrenaline dump. "And you're a terrible shot if you think I can hit anything with this cannon." Chayton let out a low, rough sound. It took Kelly a moment to realize he was chuckling. "You provided covering fire," Chayton said. "That is soldier's work. You did well, little bird. But now the game changes. Cross knows he cannot take us alone. He will drive us toward the trap." "What trap?" "Thorn is not just chasing us," Chayton said, looking at the moon. "He is waiting for us." Dawn broke over the Sonoran desert like a bruised peach, purple and orange and unforgivingly bright. They had been riding for 2 days. Chayton's wound was festering. The heat was relentless. They were out of water. They were approaching Agua Fria, an abandoned mining town near the Mexican border. It was a ghost town of rotting wood buildings and rusted machinery, but it had a well. "We stop," Chayton rasped. He slid off the horse and nearly fell. His skin was gray, burning with fever. The infection from the bullet wound was spreading faster than his body could fight it. Kelly caught him, struggling under his massive weight. She helped him sit against the side of a dilapidated saloon. "I'll get water," Kelly said. She grabbed the canteen. "Wait!" Chayton grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak. "Too quiet. No birds." "We have no choice, Chayton. You're burning up." Kelly walked into the dusty main street of Agua Fria. The silence was eerie. The wind creaked through the empty window frames. She reached the town well in the center of the square and began to crank the rusty handle. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The bucket came up, splashing with cool, muddy water. She filled the canteen. She was about to turn back to Chayton when a voice echoed from the balcony of the old hotel across the street. "That's far enough, Mrs. Thorne." Kelly froze. She looked up. Silas Thorne stood on the balcony, leaning on the railing like he was surveying his cattle. He looked tired, dusty, and meaner than a rattlesnake. "You look terrible, my dear," Silas drawled. "That dress really has seen better days." Kelly dropped the bucket. Her hand went to the gun in her belt. "I wouldn't," Silas said, raising a finger. From the shadows of the livery stable, the blacksmith shop, and the saloon, men stepped out, 12 of them, all armed with rifles leveled at her. "Where is he?" Silas asked. "Where is the dog?" "He's gone," Kelly lied, standing tall. "He died in the desert. I'm alone." Silas laughed. "You never were a good liar, Kelly. But it doesn't matter. I have something that might convince you to tell the truth. Bring him out." The doors of the livery stable swung open. 2 of Silas's men dragged a figure out into the sunlight. Kelly gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Pa!" It was Seamus O'Malley. He had been beaten. His face was swollen, his clothes torn, and his hands were bound behind his back with rough rope. He stumbled and fell into the dust. "Kelly," Seamus croaked. "Run." Silas walked down the stairs of the hotel, dusting off his sleeves. He walked over to Seamus and placed his boot on the old man's neck, pressing his face into the dirt. "Let him go," Kelly screamed, stepping forward. The rifles of the 12 men clicked in unison. "I will," Silas said smoothly. I'll let him go. I'll even pay off his debts. All of them. He can retire in St. Louis and drink himself to death in comfort. What do you want? Kelly demanded. You know what I want. I want you to come back. I want you to sign the mineral rights over to me. And Silas paused, his eyes scanning the alleyway where Kelly had come from. I want the Apache. He's not here, Kelly insisted. Silas drew his revolver and cocked the hammer. He pointed it at the back of Seamus's head. I'm going to count to 3, Silas said boredly. 1. Silas, don't. 2. Please. 3. I am here. The voice boomed from the side of the saloon. Chayton stepped out into the open. He looked like death walking. He was leaning heavily against the wall, his left arm useless, his chest heaving. But he held his Winchester in his right hand, the barrel pointing at the ground. He had no fight left in him, and everyone could see it. Let the old man up, Chayton said. Silas smiled, a cruel, victorious smile. He holstered his gun and stepped off Seamus's neck. Well, well, the wolf of the desert. You look like you need a doctor. Let them go, Chayton said. You want me? Take me. Oh, I plan to, Silas said. Cross. Do it. From the roof of the hotel, a shot rang out. The bullet struck Chayton in the leg. He crumbled, falling to one knee with a groan. Kelly screamed and tried to run to him, but 2 of Silas's men grabbed her, pinning her arms back. Don't kill him yet, Silas shouted to the unseen sniper. I want him to watch. Silas walked over to Kelly. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. The honeymoon is over, Kelly, Silas whispered. We're going home. You're going to sign those papers, and then you're going to watch us hang your savage friend from the highest tree in Coyote Springs. He turned to his men. Tie the Indian to a horse. Drag him if you have to. We ride for home. Kelly struggled, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Chayton. He was on his knees, bleeding, surrounded by men. He met her eyes. There was no fear in them, only an apology. He had failed. The debt was unpaid. As the men roughly hauled Chayton up and threw a noose around his neck to lead him like a dog, Kelly felt something inside her break. It wasn't her spirit. It was her innocence. She looked at her father, broken and weeping in the dust. She looked at Silas, gloating in his victory. And she looked at Chayton, the only man who had ever treated her with honor. This isn't over, she thought, a cold resolve settling in her stomach. You are taking me back to your house, Silas. But you are forgetting one thing. You just taught me how to shoot. The return to Coyote Springs was a funeral procession for the living. Silas Thorne rode in front, his chest puffed out like a bantam rooster. Behind him, dragged by a rope attached to a deputy's saddle, walked Chayton. The Apache warrior was covered in dust and dried blood, his steps faltering but never stopping. And behind them rode Kelly, her hands bound to the saddle horn, flanked by the mercenary Jedediah Cross. The town was waiting. Word had traveled fast. Silas had won. The savage was captured. The bride was retrieved. They stopped in the town square, right in front of the hanging tree, an ancient oak with a thick horizontal branch that had seen too much death. Get the town out here, Silas bellowed to Sheriff Miller. I want everyone to see this. I want them to see what happens when you steal from Silas Thorne. Shopkeepers, wives, and children trickled out, forming a silent ring around the square. They looked at Chayton with a mixture of fear and pity. They looked at Kelly with shame. Silas dismounted and walked over to Kelly. He cut the ropes, binding her hands with a small pocket knife. Get down, he ordered. Kelly slid off the horse. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced them to hold her weight. She smoothed her torn, dirty dress. She looked at Chayton. He was being hauled up onto a horse beneath the branch. A deputy was fitting a heavy hemp noose around his neck. "Now," Silas said, motioning to a small table that had been set up near the tree. On it sat a document and a quill. "The mineral rights. Sign it, Kelly. Sign it, and I'll make sure his neck snaps clean. Don't sign it," and we let him strangle slowly. Kelly walked to the table. She picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. "You win, Silas," she said softly. "I always win," Silas smirked, turning to the crowd. "Let this be a lesson. Civilization is built on order, and I am the order." Kelly dipped the pen in the ink. She looked at her father, Seamus, who was standing in the front row, weeping silently. He looked broken. No, Kelly thought. He isn't broken. He's just waiting. She caught her father's eye. She gave a microscopic nod. Seamus O'Malley, the town drunk, the coward who sold his daughter, took a deep breath. He reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a gun. He didn't have one. He pulled out a flask of high-proof whiskey, but he didn't drink it. "Hey, Sheriff!" Seamus yelled, his voice cracking. Sheriff Miller turned. "Shut up, old man." Seamus uncorked the flask and hurled it. It wasn't aimed at the sheriff. It was aimed at the erratic, nervous horse Chayton was sitting on. The heavy glass flask struck the horse's flank. The horse reared, whinnying in panic. "Hold that horse!" Silas screamed. If the horse bolted, Chayton would swing. But amidst the chaos, the horse bucked the deputy holding the bridle. The deputy fell back, knocking into Silas. For a split second, Silas Thorne was off balance. His coat flap fell open. The pearl handle of his revolver was exposed. Kelly didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply moved. She dropped the pen. She stepped forward, her hand moving in the blur she had practiced in the cave. Check the cylinder. Grip high. Squeeze, don't pull. She ripped Silas's gun from his holster. Silas spun around, regaining his balance. "You stupid bit." Bang! The shot was deafening. Silas Thorne stopped mid-sentence. He looked down. A dark red stain was blossoming on his white shirt, right above his gut. He looked up at Kelly, his eyes wide with genuine confusion. "You!" he gasped. "I'm not your property," Kelly said. Her voice was cold, echoing off the wooden buildings. "And I'm not your wife." Silas fell to his knees. Sheriff Miller fumbled for his shotgun. "Drop it, girl." Kelly swung the heavy revolver toward the sheriff, but she didn't have to shoot. From the roof of the general store, a different rifle cracked. Boom! Sheriff Miller's hat flew off, pinned to the wall behind him by a heavy buffalo slug. High above, Jedediah Cross, the bounty hunter, lowered his Sharps rifle. He tipped his hat to Kelly. "He didn't pay me," Cross shouted down to the stunned square. "Contract's void." The deputies looked at the dying Silas Thorne, then at the girl with the smoking gun, and finally at the sniper on the roof. They slowly lowered their weapons. Kelly ran to the horse beneath the tree. She grabbed the reins to steady the beast. She reached up and loosened the noose around Chayton's neck. "Are you alive?" she asked, her voice finally breaking. Chayton coughed, rubbing his throat. He looked down at her. The fierce warrior offered her a smile that reached his eyes. "I am alive, little bird. Thanks to you." The town was silent. Silas Thorne lay face down in the dirt, dead. The tyrant was gone. Kelly turned to the crowd. She saw the faces of the people who had done nothing, but she didn't feel anger anymore. She felt pity. She walked over to the table, picked up the mineral rights deed, and held it over the flame of a nearby lantern. The paper caught fire. She watched it burn until it was nothing but ash in the wind. "The gold stays in the ground," she announced, "and the O'Malley ranch stays with the O'Malleys." She went to her father. Seamus was trembling, but he was standing upright. She hugged him. "Let's go home, Pa." The legend of the White Rose. Chayton did not stay. He could not. The law from Tucson would come eventually, and a man like him would never be truly free in a town like Coyote Springs. 3 days later, at the edge of the Badlands, Kelly sat on her horse, watching him prepare to leave. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "The wind blows where it wishes," Chayton said, mounting his Appaloosa. "But if the storm comes, I will hear it." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in leather. He handed it to her. It was a new knife. The handle was carved from bone, shaped like a bird in flight. "You are not a bird anymore," Chayton said. "You are the hawk." He turned his horse and rode south, disappearing into the heat haze of the horizon. Kelly O'Malley never married. She took over the freight line and ran it better than her father ever did. She rebuilt the ranch. She became known across the territory not as the victim of Silas Thorne, but as the woman who cleaned up Coyote Springs. And every Sunday, she wore a white rose pinned to her lapel. Some said it was for the husband she lost. Others said it was for the innocence she lost. But those who knew the truth knew it was a message, a signal to a ghost in the desert, letting him know that she was safe, she was strong, and the debt was paid in full. And that, my friends, is the legend of Kelly O'Malley and the Apache warrior Chayton. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with guns, but with the courage to stand up when everyone else stays seated. Kelly went from a pawn in a rich man's game to the queen of her own destiny, proving that you should never underestimate someone just because they seem broken. What did you think of the twist with the bounty hunter? Would you have forgiven the townspeople if you were Kelly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep writing your own path.